To the picture right now to talk more about what went on at Oaklawn, specifically about American Pharoah and the 3-year-old scene. It's Derby Dozen Steve Haskin himself. Good morning.
Good morning, fellows.
Good morning, Steve.
Fellow Derby lovers.
Derby lovers everywhere. What's the Derby clock say? How far are? What are we at? 50.
We're close.
6
We're
days.
closing
50
in.
something days, Steve. How many days?
I don't pay attention to days. It's the first Saturday in May. I don't count down the days. Right now I'm counting down to the final preps first. We got to get through those first.
Well, let's.
We're coming to the end of the. The 50 pointers, and the 100 pointers will tell us a lot. Will tell us a lot more.
Well, let's see what your thoughts were going in. We talked obviously Friday on Thursday on radio, but set the stage. Not with what we expected from American Pharoah overall, but under the circumstances, Steve, by the time we got to yesterday afternoon, 6 o'clock, this racetrack was a soupy mess, raining on and off all day, and of course, Untappable getting beat set the stage for people to be ready to pounce on any hiccup that American Pharoah, any weakness was going to be completely exploited in the Twitterverse, certainly. But what were you looking for under the circumstances with the wet track when they went into the gate?
Well, first of all, if you look at the earlier races, and if you looked at the track, I mean, you can see the track was sealed, and they were bounding along pretty good on it. And then the Rebel was 3 races later, and you could see a lot more water on the racetrack. And that's when you have a track sealed and it rains on top of a sealed track, it has a tendency possibly to get slower. So I think actually the track was getting a little bit heavier as the day went on. And basically what I was looking for from American Pharoah under these conditions and under the circumstances and under the considering the field we have, was exactly what we saw. I mean, you couldn't have asked for anything better than that. I mean, it was, if you wanted to show somebody a video of what a thoroughbred is supposed to look like in action, that was the most picture perfect race I can imagine. I mean, I just thought he looked sensational. He was just bounding over that ground and just striding over it beautifully, ears straight up. Espinosa never touching him with the whip. Listen, did he beat the greatest field? No, he certainly didn't. He beat. But let's put it this way: when you beat a Pletcher horse who's getting good right now, who's won a couple of races in a row, it's not like you're beating a slouch. And you have to remember is that everybody's talking about the races like the Smarty Jones and the Southwest Stakes and Far Right. Well, the Truth or Else and Bold Conquest were both coming off of pretty big efforts in the Southwest. So you had 2 horses who obviously liked Oaklawn and liked the slop. So there were a lot of question marks with American Pharoah. How was he going to make the transition from 2 to 3? How was he going to handle the slop? Although he was certainly bred for it, considering his sire was second in the Kentucky Derby in the slop, and his sire's sire won the Wood Memorial in the mud. So the breeding was certainly there. But listen, what more can you expect of a horse? Some people are going to talk about the 3/4 fraction of 1:15:1, that it was a paid workout. Yeah, well, you know what? We know how fast this horse is. We don't need to see him run fast. You want him to come back and run a 110 buyer the first time out? Under the circumstances, you don't want him to do too much on a racetrack like that. You don't want him to knock himself out. You want to compare the time. The time was 4/5 slower than the Razorback, but number one, the Razorback, that was a pretty good field. There was some pretty good horses in there. You had, major stakes winners. You had classic placed horses. You had Breeders' Cup placed horses in there. So I mean, it was a good field. And you have to remember that race was run. They had a faster pace. Number one, but that was a stretch long duel. So those horses were running a lot harder. And those older horses, the first 3 finishes in the Razorback were carrying 4 pounds less than American Pharoah, who basically just did it without being asked. So if you want to compare, I know the fractions were a lot faster in the first race, but still with that, the Razorback, they came home the last 5/16 in 32-1, and American Pharaoh came home in 30-2. So, I mean, that's what you want to see. I mean, I don't mind the 115. You know, if you can come home in 30, anytime you can come home in 30-2 on a track like that, he got out of it as much as he could possibly have gotten out of it. Now you have to look ahead into the Arkansas Derby and say, all right, you know, now it's time to maybe get a little bit tested at some point in the race at least. I don't mean he has to be, you know, in a ding-dong stretch battle and win by a head or anything, but just get tested, turn back a horse, just have some good horse look him in the eye in that race. And, but, you know, listen, he still, with all that, he still wound up with another triple-digit buyer. So that's 3 triple-digit buyers, and he's going to improve off this race. But I think we learned everything we needed to learn from him. And from a visual standpoint, this was as stunning a performance as you could possibly ask for.
And we didn't see the start, but he bobbled a little bit at the start, quickly got into stride and went right up and was contending early. But there was also a report he lost a shoe.
Well, he
Well, he didn't lose the shoe.
pulled the shoe.
He didn't lose the shoe. He sprung the shoe.
Okay, which to me is even more, yeah.
Which actually, in some ways, could be a little worse.
Yeah.
Because he was running with a bent shoe. So the things like that is that you always, you know, you got to wait a few days. Anything can pop up from that. You hate to see a horse running on a track like that with a bent shoe, but it certainly moves his performance up even more. But you know, you can see him bobble for sure. It wasn't a bad stumble or anything, but it was enough, obviously, for him to grab himself where he, you know, grabbed part of that shoe and bent it off. So you got to hope that nothing settles in the next couple of days or so. So once he can get by, you know, hopefully by Tuesday or so, if they haven't found anything, then hopefully everything will be okay. But I mean, that enhances his performance even more.
I agree, Steve, and the way he did it, and when they actually zeroed in on him during that point after the race, when they showed the slow motion at like half speed or so, it really, I kept saying to people that said, oh, we didn't learn anything about this horse. Well, wait a minute. You learned that he basically came back at the level, at least, that he left us as a 2-year-old without much challenge. However, knowing that he gets over this kind of a racetrack, I'm not going to wish that we end up with a typical Louisville typhoon, but we certainly have had enough rotten weather derbies to feel like, okay, you did learn something about this horse, that he's going to skip over a wet surface like a champ. So if there is something that we learned, it's that.
When you don't have to worry about a sloppy track in the Derby, you're in good shape. It takes so much pressure off you, having to watch the weather every day and say, oh, God, I hope it doesn't come up sloppy. And listen, I remember when I first got interested in racing, you know, talking about from the late 60s, I mean, basically all the way through the 90s, it was never a sloppy track in the Derby. I mean, once in a while you have, you know, Sunday Silence, you get, you know, a track, and that was more of a drier, muddier type of track. But as far as a really wet, soupy track, well, we've just had so many of them lately that you never know anymore. Obviously, the weather patterns have changed, but I mean, I always remember the first Saturday in May was always a glorious, gorgeous day, and we always had a fast track. And we don't get those as much anymore. I mean, if you look at how many sloppy tracks we've had in the last 7 or 8 years only, you obviously never know. So if you can not pay attention to the weather and not care, but you know, a sloppy track at Derby, the way they seal that racetrack, could help a horse like him. You know, if he gets out there and skips over it. But you know, listen, the more he wins races like this, the more you build up a reputation where if you have another horse in the race, unless you're Pletcher, who's got 7 right now, but if you got a Derby horse in the race, you don't want to go head and head with this horse. You know what I mean? Obviously, you want to win the Derby, but you don't want to cost yourself a place in the Derby. So obviously, you know, Pletcher would have the luxury of sending something after him. But listen, we've had some incredible, you know, wire-to-wire performances, even the ones that don't win. Look at Bodemeister. Everybody looked at Bodemeister and saying, you know, oh, well, listen, there's a lightly raced horse. You never ran at 2. How close did he come to pulling off the Derby?
Exactly.
You see horses like Hard Spun, who took a tremendous performance by Street Sense to prevent him from winning the Derby wire to wire. So yeah, we've had some good performances by horses who are on the lead. But listen, that's looking ahead. I'd love to see. Ideal scenario is to have some speed horse, coming out of a sprint race in the Arkansas Derby and have him sit behind him. Because let's put it this way: any horse that can relax the way he can. I mean, first off, here's a horse. That's why you got to give Bob Baffert so much credit. He works his horse 110-2, and what does that do? It takes the edge off of him. How many horses would come back after this longer layoff and be so sharp and so fresh that you just can't hold him off the lead? I mean, look how relaxed this horse was. I mean, he just sat there with his ears straight up, was able to just coast along, in 1:15-1. A horse with that much natural speed, coming off that longer layoff, that's a tribute to Bob Baffert for taking the edge off that horse with those 6 and 7 furlong workouts where he works faster than other horses run. So listen, nobody gets a horse ready for a race like the Derby. You know that even if this horse should win the Arkansas Derby fairly easily, what Baffert's going to do to this horse between now and the Arkansas Derby and between the Arkansas Derby and the Kentucky Derby, there's never a fitness question with Baffert horses, the way he works. So, I mean, this horse works 110-2 like breaking sticks. So I don't see any problem, but I would like to see him get tested a little bit in the Arkansas Derby, just to get him a little battle tested, get him a little toughened. Just a race like this is a far cry from a 20-horse Derby field with 20 legitimate stakes horses in there. And so far, unlike most Derby trails where you get crazy winners and you're totally confused, now what? This crop is sorting itself out with every race. I mean, we've got ourselves a solid top 10 right now, and we'll see what happens in the other preps. But so far for the 50-point preps, you can't ask for more formful results. I mean, the top 5 especially, top 5 or 6 right now are very strong, and there's not a lot of flaws in them. So I think the picture is coming together really nicely, and like I said, the big 100-point preps. All these horses need, by the way, is just to get through this race, get a good race in there. They don't need to win. All these horses that we're seeing, like American Pharaoh, like Dortmund, like Carpe Diem, if something happens, by the way, and they get beat in the neck or something like that, or whatever, for whatever reason, listen, the majority of Derby horses lose their final start, so that doesn't bother me. It's just that these horses are now established, and get them through, maintain what you got, get them through these final preps, get a good, solid race into them, and make sure that they're peaking on Derby Day.
Let's take a peek. Speaking of peaks, let's take a peek, Steve, ahead to next week, because you've got a big field. In fact, it's going to be an over-capacity field. They're going to have to restrict some of these entrants today at Turfway when it comes to the field for the Spiral. And it seems to me that whether it's we can go back to Animal Kingdom and the other horses in these recent vintage of the Spiral, this has become, again, a fairly important prep. And when you look at the horses like Metaboss, who, if we go back to the performance in San Francisco, and then some of the others that are heading here, Royal Sun with the upset in the Battaglia, and then the subsequent examination of how beautifully bred he is for 9 furlongs and beyond. This ends up being a nice addition to the Spiral. Give us some thoughts. I pulled the nomination PPs this morning, and in addition to those 2 principals, Royal Sun and Metaboss, there's a couple of other lurkers, and of course you mentioned the points. Again, we're coming back with 50, 20, and 10.
Well, it's funny, you mentioned the Animal Kingdom race. You remember how that turned out? Animal Kingdom only got in that race because his stablemate, because he had, I think, like $15,000 in earnings more than his stablemate. I forgot his name, China or something. I forgot his full name. But the other horse was Team Valor's Derby horse at that point, and Animal Kingdom was not. But Animal Kingdom had slightly more earnings than the other horse, and he got in the spiral, and the other horse had to wind up going into Lexington, and didn't turn out to be nearly as good a horse. But Animal Kingdom used the spiral and went into the Derby, never having run on dirt in his life, and we saw how, what kind of horse he turned out. But I'm actually looking forward to this race, and I know it's on synthetic and everything, but I'm fascinated by this race. I really am. I think there's some really interesting horses in here that I believe will be able to make the transition from synthetic to dirt. Royal Sun doesn't even have to make much of a transition because his early career was all on dirt, and Meadowboss has got plenty of a dirt pedigree, and just the way he runs, he just looks like a really good horse. I'm really looking forward. I think if one of those two horses should win this race impressively, a lot of people just look right past Royal Sun in that last race. The Battaglia, the Great War, bled and just didn't run his race. But I'm telling you, if you look at the Royal Sun, I mean, he ran like a really good horse. I mean, I think he's a much better horse than people think. And if you look at Meadowboss, that was a pretty solid El Camino Real Derby field he beat, and the way he did it, I mean, he just looked good doing it. So I mean, and you can listen, you can't throw out Imperial. He didn't run well in his last start, but we know what he's capable of on grass, and we know actually what he's capable of on dirt. I mean, he has run well on dirt. He just didn't run well last time, for whatever reason. So he's always going to be dangerous on there. And then what's going to happen with him afterwards? And also, what's going to happen with these horses after this spiral? Are they going to run one more time, or are they going to go into the Derby off of 6 weeks? It's a long time. I know Animal Kingdom did it, but Animal Kingdom was a very special horse. But ideally, 6 weeks is a little bit long to go into the Derby. But I think that's probably where they're going to lean in. Unless whoever wins, like we mentioned on the show, if they want to go in the Lexington Stakes just to get a race in, and they don't. It's only a 10-point race, but they don't need any more points than that than they already have anyway. So I think that'll be interesting. And so you got those three. You got Pepperoni, who ran a really good second, and the Battaglia, who looks like he's getting good. So I think it's going to be a very intriguing race. And then let's not forget out west and see what Firing Line looks like. And in the Sunland Derby, I would imagine there'll be some couple of decent horses running in there for that kind of money, and to get away from the Dortmund gang up at Santa Anita with all of those good horses. So there's going to be some, I think some decent horses running in that race.
They also talked about potentially Lord Nelson, maybe a quick turnaround in the Sunland Derby. And I know,
why not?
I think we had you in here, in fact, on San Vicente Day, and you liked him in that one, maybe up against Texas Red that day, and he did get it done. But now in the quick turnaround out of the Santa Anita Derby, you've taken him out of your Derby dozen. But what are your thoughts on Lord Nelson?
Hey, listen, I mean, right now, I've been convinced all along he was a two-turn horse. Now, he's trying his darndest to prove me wrong. I mean, here's a horse he's 3 for 3 in sprints and hasn't been in the money in his 3 starts around 2 turns. So, I'm going to be crazy to stand here and keep insisting he's a two-turn horse. But I look at his pedigree, and, I know physically he doesn't look like a mile and a quarter horse. But that's the way Argentine horses look. And this horse is bred classically, with all this Argentine blood. And if you look at Argentine horses, they're usually big, powerful, muscled horses. That they're not the European type horses. So, yeah, why not? I would give him a shot because you know what? If he comes back and he runs a good race and he qualifies for the Derby, then you got 6 weeks for him. The 6 weeks, that's fine. You know what I mean? I don't mind the 6 weeks for him. The fact that he's come right back off the San Felipe to run there. Because I think that's one of the reasons why. Because, if he had to run again, it's a different story. You don't want to keep running him every 2-3 weeks. God forbid you should do that like they used to do every year in the past. But listen, we've had horses come off the spiral and win the Derby off 6 weeks, and we had a horse coming out of Sunland Park Derby to win the Derby off the 6 weeks. So it's not like it can't be done. And Lord Nelson does have the foundation. So, yeah, I would give him another shot. Why not? See how he runs against firing line. Give him, a good gauge. What happened in the San Felipe? I don't know. Listen, it could be that maybe the mile and 16th was too short. Never mind too long. Maybe he just doesn't have the speed of a Dortmund and a Prospect Park and a Bolo. Maybe he needs.
He was one pace, Steve. That's an interesting suggestion because he pretty much stayed in the same position all the way around the racetrack last Saturday, and he never really moved forward. Didn't lose ground. He just stayed in that little spot on the rail. And that's an interesting suggestion, and that when we go 1 mile and an eighth, when other horses are starting to feel the burn, he'll just keep plugging along at that one pace, and that's a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing, you're 100% right. When they run evenly like that, and the thing is, they run evenly. You got to remember, by the way, he was pretty close to the pace on the backstretch.
Yeah.
He was right there. He was like a length and a half off the pace on there, and just kept plugging away. And then the rail opened up. He just didn't have that speed to match, a Dortmund and Bolo. And when they kicked on, they ran fast in the race. It was a fast run race, and it just could be that he actually wants longer. And you got to remember too, by the way, he said he was coming off a sprint as well. Now this is going to be the first time he's putting back-to-back 2-turn races in. So maybe this race got him honed a bit more, got him a little bit more bottom, and we'll see. I mean, if let's put it this way: if firing line gets out there and runs a corker and runs the way he's been running against Dortmund, and Lord Nelson is competitive and runs, let's say, second to him by a length and a half or whatever, so watch out. You know what I mean? Because I think that'll help a horse like that. But it'll be curious to see what he does. I think it's a great move running him back. And if it doesn't work, then so what? What do you want to do? You point him for the Woody Stevens or something, whatever. But give it a shot. Wow. And I know John Fort's willing, because John Fort still believes that he's the owner. He believes that he's a distance horse. And John Fort's a pretty sharp guy, so he knows how to pick out a horse. Well, so I'm not giving up on this horse. I want to see him go 2 turns one more time with a 2-turn race under him, and stretching out in distance.
Well, 2 9-furlong races Saturday and Sunday. The Spiral at Turfway on Saturday, then the Sunland Derby at Sunland Park in New Mexico on Sunday. So we'll look forward to get to the 9 furlongs. That is absolutely the dividing line. Steve, it's going to start to get interesting. Appreciate the extended look.
My pleasure, guys. Anytime.
Well, we will talk later in the week, and we'll be that much closer. And as I mentioned,